This video is going to be full of a bunch of different tips and tricks for the electric eel wheel 6. There have been a lot of questions, and instead of making 10 short videos, I'm going to put all of those things together into this one larger video, and I will mark the video so that you can quickly jump around to different sections if you have a specific question you want answered. The first question that a lot of people are asking is how come this bottom cover is a little loose? They're having problems with it falling off, and there's a really easy fix for that, and it just involves a screwdriver. So you can tighten these screws, a couple of turns until you sort of feel it reach that bottom plastic. You might want to back off, like a little bit, maybe a quarter of a turn or so, and then it will be sort of able to sort of click in there and be more substantial. If you never want to remove the bottom cover, you can just go until it's sort of pretty snug, and then it's never going to come off. This one's kind of hard to get to. Some screwdrivers can reach it and some can't. I can usually get it, but if you're having troubles with that one, if you actually only do the other 3 screws, it works pretty well as well. You can also totally use the electric eel wheel 6 without that bottom cover, just using it like this. Some people don't like it this way because these rubber feet are on the bottom case here, but you can actually pull these off of here, and I put holes in the bottom of this case so you can actually put the rubber feet in here, and it looks a little weird, but it's sort of up to you whether you want to do this or not. But you can actually transfer the rubber feet onto this case, and then your electric eel wheel 6 will be a little bit smaller if you're not needing the bottom cover, and that's a perfectly fine way to use it. Another question I get is whether these bearings have to be oiled, or does any part of the electric eel wheel 6 need to be oiled? And the answer is no. So the way the bearings are designed, this outer portion is going to be stationary and the inner part rotates. So all of the rotation is actually sort of inside the sealed black portion of the bearing. So you don't need to oil these outer parts or the inner part because neither of those are supposed to be moving. What happens is these outer parts aren't going to rotate, and this metal shaft on the inner part of the bearing doesn't rotate, but the inside portion of that bearing, where it's sort of sealed in the black area, is rotating. So there's no oil required anywhere. The same is true for the bobbins. If you take one of your bobbins apart, it has one of those bearings in it as well, and the bearing's actually designed so that it presses this outer part together. The tube and the disc sort of compress that on that outer lip of metal, and then the inner portion is going to be on the metal shaft, and it's the balls inside that black portion of the bearing that are actually rotating. Everything else is stationary. So that's already lubricated in there, and you don't need to add any lubrication elsewhere. A question I sometimes get about these drive belts is they don't seem to fit very well. So if you put them on here like this, you can see that it only reaches down to about there. So people are like, it's not the right size, but it actually is. I designed it to be tight to make sure that there was no vibration and there's no slipping of this belt. So you just tug it a little bit harder and it will sort of reach down there. Over time it will stretch out a little bit and get looser. Sometimes people will ask if their bobbins are properly assembled because they can still see these threads. And the answer is having a little bit of thread on this tube is perfectly normal. None of the bobbins will actually close all the way. And you just want to sort of twist them until they're nice and tight, and then it should be properly assembled. The threads are there because it was easier to design the plastic parts to have a little bit of extra thread. Another reason that the threads are there is some people like to attach their lead yarn right there where the threads are on the edge, and then it's less likely that the lead yarn will slip. A lot of the time the bobbin discs will show up and they don't have any bearing in them, and you'll have extra bearings to put in them, but sometimes people have trouble sort of pressing them in. It can be sort of tricky to get it lined up perfectly and apply enough pressure. So one trick that I do is I'll take a one bearing and put it down, and then I'll stack a second one on top of it. And then you just take the disc of a bobbin and you can more easily sort of press it down, and it just sort of pushes the bearing in, and you've got one bearing in and one left over, and you can go on and do your other bobbin discs in the same way. And since you have extra bearings in your parts pack, you should have enough bearings to do this to all of the bobbins that you're having trouble getting the bearings into. The tension string here will eventually break, and you'll have to replace it. If it seems to be breaking pretty quickly, one thing to check is there's this little pulley on the bobbin, and sometimes there's a little rough piece of plastic in there, and if you take a little piece of sandpaper or a file, you can sort of smooth out the little rough place, and your tension band will last longer. But eventually you'll have to replace the tension string, and to do that, all you're going to do is find a string of similar thickness, or maybe a little thinner. Some people actually prefer the thinner string, and you just tie it to the spring like this, and then the other end you will run through the little groove. You'll run it through this little hole here, and that's pretty much it. Once it's through that hole, you just do whoops, can't see it. Once it's through that little hole, you'll just tie a little double knot like this. Just make it snug. There's little grips on the dial, so it actually holds the string pretty well. And once you've done that, the string is now installed, and you're ready for using your new tension string. In the parts pack, you'll receive around 4 of these little rings, and a lot of people aren't sure what they're used for, so I'll show you that here. The hooks, the sliding hooks on the flyer actually have these rings installed, and eventually it's possible for one of these to break, and you can remove the end cap like that, take it off, and then it's a pretty easy task. Take off, oh, the old one will actually fall off if it's broken, but then you just put a new one on, and you can put it back onto the flyer, and you're good to go. Another question that I get sometimes is, why does my electric eel wheel 6 vibrate at higher speeds? And the reason for that is usually that the flyer is not in balance. In this case, if we go up to higher speeds, you can see that there's quite a bit of vibration, and the electric eel wheel 6 is sort of vibrating around. And the reason in this case that's happening is because the flyer hooks are not aligned. To keep everything in balance, you want to have these 2 flyer hooks directly across, as well as these, but you're not really moving these first ones, so you just have to sort of keep, so if you move this one to here, you want to move that one to there as well, and when you have them directly across from each other like that, it gets rid of the majority of the vibration. It's much smoother. Also, sometimes one of these end caps will come out, and if that comes out, then again, it's not going to be in balance, and it can cause some vibration. Also, by putting on the battery cover on the bottom, which has those rubber feet and a little extra weight, that also helps it sort of from moving around on the table. So that's sort of some suggestions there. Sometimes people want to remove the motor, and the process for that is pretty easy. There's a little set screw in there, so you want to rotate it until you see the set screw, and then you will use this little hex wrench that came with your electric eel wheel. It was in the parts pack, and you want to get it in there, and then you just turn it like that, and it should come right off like that. You'll have access to 2 little screws here, and you can just take those screws out. And then the last step is there's these wires going into it. You can actually just grab those and sort of pull them out, and now the motor is out. If you also need to take out the circuit board, that's also pretty easy. There's just 3 screws, 1, 2, 3, holding it in place, and then there's this nut, plastic nut on the outside that you also have to take off, and then the circuit board will come out as well. Some people have reported that their spinning wheel suddenly slows down, and there's a few things to check if that happens. First, you want to make sure that the drive belt is in the little pulley for it up here on the flyer. Then you'll want to make sure that it's on the motor pulley. In this case, you can see that it's not. So in this case, that's why it's actually, I mean, that's definitely not full speed. It's also, the belt is slipping. So the fix for this is pretty simple. You know, you just have to put the drive belt back onto the pulley. And if we spin it up, yeah, that's much faster. That's fixed. Another thing that can go wrong sometimes is the pulley here get loose, and there's a little, there's a little set screw on the bottom, and this hex wrench fits into it, and you can make sure that that's tight. Sometimes the set screw will just be a little bit loose, and it'll kind of make like a grinding sound, and that's basically the set screw is sliding against the shaft. So in those cases, it'll make noise. It'll sort of be, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. So that's definitely, that set screw is definitely something to check if you're having issues with your motor. So the last thing I'll mention are battery packs. I know with the electric eel wheel Nano, there was this USB cable, and you'd plug it into a USB port, and then you can plug this into the Nano. And that doesn't work properly with the electric eel wheel 6. It's definitely not going to damage the electric eel wheel 6. What ends up happening is it draws more power than it should, and that can sometimes cause problems with this cable. I definitely haven't fully tested these cables with the electric eel wheel 6. I don't recommend using them. They also only provide 9 volts, so they're not going to spin the electric eel wheel 6 as fast. Instead, you should make sure you should use a battery pack like this Talent Cell one that has a dedicated 12 volt output. And that's sort of what's designed to work with the electric eel wheel 6. And this particular one comes with this strange Y-shaped cable, and that's so you can sort of charge it and use it at the same time. But what all you need to do to hook this up to the electric eel wheel 6 is plug it into the battery like that, and then plug it into the back of the electric eel wheel 6, and now you're ready to go. So hopefully you found all of these different tips and techniques of using the electric eel wheel 6 helpful. Thanks for watching.